Las Vegas hockey fans don't have to be sad for too long because now they can shift their focus to football because their upcoming football team has 3 picks in the first round.
Great point right there. Excellent segue from NBC Sports California. Our dear friend, Mr. Scott Bair. Scott, it is Carmichael Dave. It is Kyle. It is Jay. Good morning. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm not exactly sure what that blue line on the ice is for, but I still liked what happened last night. That was amazing theater.
Scott, it's for first downs.
Oh, okay, good.
Scott,
arm headed towards the goal. Yep.
Dude, I'm totally with you. They kept doing the icing thing, and then somebody was offsides, and then when the puck would get close to the net, I found myself watching the net and not the player with the puck. I still don't really know how to watch hockey because my hockey watching history is all of about 8 games lifetime if you combined them. But last night, my blood pressure was sky high. That regardless of what sport you like, it's hard to deny that was a very fun game last night.
Yeah, and I think that's what sports fans can get into. It's the constant tension. It's the never feeling comfortable because you're on offense, but in 2.5 seconds you could be in total, peril. So ultimately, I think that's what's fun about it. That's not, it's fun as we transition from the ultimate sporting event that is playoff hockey to the reading of a telephone book, to borrow parlance from my buddy Ray Ratto. It's a quite different environment that we're heading towards, but one that's going to hold a lot of drama, especially for this week only. The most interesting team in the NFL, and I cover it, baby.
That's
Silver
right.
and black.
An excellent professional transition by NBC Sports California.
Really strong.
That was very, very strong. The Oakland Raiders with the 24th. They've got 3 first-round picks, plus a second, a fourth, a fifth, a couple of sevens. I mean, they've got ammo. I'll ask you this first and foremost. Pretty likely they're not going to pick all those picks where we see them. I imagine Mr. Mayock and Mr. Gruden will be maybe open to wheel and deal come this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at John Gruden's last draft, he had 6 trades within the course of the 3-day draft period, another one right after it ended. So there's definitely a willingness to move around Mike Mayock for as much as there's smoke screens and this is Liars Month and all that type of thing. He was honest and forthright about the fact that they have a huge gap, a 70 selection gap between numbers 35 and 106. And this is a very rich draft in the second and third round. And he said specifically he wants to go fishing in that area. In order to do so, he's got to trade out high. Obviously, the higher that you trade out, the more capital that you get in return. Everybody's looking at number 4 as a possible trade-out spot. I think that that's definitely possible. But if they take their guy at 4 and then they get who they want at 24, that 27th pick could most certainly be a trade down the board.
Reports out there that Marshawn Lynch is done. Scott, I imagine this wasn't really a big surprise.
No, I wouldn't say that. I talked to a couple people at the NFL owners meetings who kind of had this to say, that the Raiders were they kept saying that they were waiting to see if Marshawn Lynch was healthy after having groin surgery last year. He was healthy. He was back and ready. And what Marshawn Lynch kind of was ultimately being, I hate to use this term, but ultimately being used for was a hedge, right? Is that they wanted to make sure that after signing Isaiah Crowell, who was a Doug Martin replacement, they wanted to leave the door open for Marshawn in case they didn't get a running back they felt could step in and make an immediate impact. In this upcoming season, they can't rely on Chris Warren and Jalen Richard alone. So it was sort of a hedge. I never really liked that for a guy that's done so much for this community, but that's how they chose to play it. Ultimately, Marshawn retiring kind of eliminates that prospect. So from that vantage, I understand why he would want to do it, not sit around and wait around to see if maybe the Raiders took his replacement or not. That doesn't sound like something that a strong person with a lot of pride would do.
I want to stick on the idea real quick of the Raiders trading. The 49ers are a team that may trade back out of their spot as well. Do you see the Raiders possibly doing business with the 49ers, either in a trade up to number 2, or we've seen the Niners in 2 of the last 3 drafts trade up to the back end of the first round? You mentioned the Raiders might want to trade out of that number 27 pick. Do you see them doing business there either?
I don't see them doing business with the 49ers going up to 2, because the 49ers, if Nick Bosa is available, right, just from kind of some contacts that I have in red and gold, you'd have to pry that pick from John Lynch's cold, dead hands. Yeah. They want Bosa, period. And I don't think they would give up much in order to get there. And let me preface, around draft time, we talk about hedges. Everything I say has some sort of conditional, so I can come back on your radio station and sound like I'm so smart. But bottom line is, the Raiders have explored the possibility of trading up to number 1, right? And it's cost prohibitive, obviously, considering the volume of needs that they have and the number of quality players, that foundational players they have a chance to get with all this draft capital that they would lose if they moved up to 1. Number 2 isn't a whole lot better, although Nick Bosa is somebody, he is a dream candidate for what the Raiders need rushing off the edge. You bring up an interesting point at number 27. Should the 49ers trade back into the first round, as they did to get Reuben Foster, and as teams are known to do, trying to get quarterbacks that in the first round so you can have that 5th-year option, something that the Raiders learned the hard way about, having to pay Derek Carr a year before they would have had they done that exact thing. So it's possible, and I think the Raiders should be on the lookout for a team like that, whether it's the 49ers or someone else, to be able to do that. The one issue with the 49ers doing that is they don't have a ton of draft picks in terms of volume this year, which makes them a less likely trade partner, because the Raiders are going to want a lot in return.
Do you see Oakland going with their 3 picks, and it may vary as well, but do you see them just going, because I remember we had you on, I think at the end of last year, and you said they just need bodies, like this roster just needs good quality players. The Raiders want as many picks as possible. Do you see them going best player available? Let's say they pick it at their 3 spots in the first round. Do you think they go best player available, or are they looking at specific needs?
I think there's always some combination of the two, but just speaking to a larger point within this Raiders draft and the Raiders' state of being, right? This is a coach-driven building. This will be a coach-driven draft, and it's not just because John Gruden has final say on all personnel matters. It's all, and Mike Mayock took this job knowing that full well and has never shied away from that. But with those things being said, coaches always go for need. Mike Mayock said that too. So when it really comes down to it, will they go for the guy that can help them win quickest? That is what Mike Mayock is there to preach against. I think he did an excellent job preaching and influencing a level of discipline during this free agency period, especially when it came to Antonio Brown. They didn't give up high draft capital to get their guy, and they got their guy at a lower, reasonable price. So I say all that to go back to your point, in that they need to draft the best player available within specific parameters, right? I don't want to hear about a wide receiver going 4th necessarily, right? Even if one was worthy of that, because the needs are so glaring somewhere else. We can talk about best player available, but if the best player available at each one of their picks is never an edge rusher, the Raiders can only fill out a 2 deep using a guy who was with the San Diego Fleet last month. Okay, so eventually they're going to have to take an edge rusher or 2 or 3. So there are some exceptions to that rule. That's where need creeps in. But this team, I still think, needs bodies up front. But this front 7 simply cannot be ignored.
Scott, speaking of edge rushers, one guy who's starting to fall down draft boards is Montez Sweat because of some health issues. If he's available at 24, is there any way he gets past the Raiders?
Did I lose him?
Scott, you there?
Oh, was my team?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Here you go. That was we had a mic issue. Go ahead, Jay.
Scott, one guy who's been falling down draft boards, speaking of edge rushers, because of some health issues is Montez Sweat. If he's available at 24, is there any way he gets past the Raiders?
I don't know if he would get past them at 27 or maybe 35. I still have, and I have for some time, I have that 24th spot earmarked for Josh Jacobs, the Alabama running back. I was in Tuscaloosa for his pro day, and they sent his position coach. And that doesn't mean that they're going to draft him, but now that Marshawn is retired, this is a kind of a frontline 3-down back and the best that you're going to get in this draft, and you can get him before Philadelphia or Indy really likes him. But again, as I revert eventually back to your question, my friend, 27 and 35, I think that ultimately gets difficult, but I don't have knowledge of the Raiders' medical opinion on Montez Sweat. Now, you can look at Maurice Hurst and their willingness to take him in the 5th round, mind you, with a heart condition that is fundamentally different than what Montez Sweat is dealing with. So I think it's possible. I've also kind of heard some, let's call them grumblings, right? I'm not going to say per source here, but some grumblings that they don't necessarily love Montez Sweat's fit, but I still think that a player of that level of talent with his physical skill and ability to get to the quarterback, I think at 27, I think it's logical. He was a part of my 7-round mock there. That you can get on our NBCSportsBarry.com, or maybe 35 as they kind of work their way through the draft. I think he's really going to be interesting to see where he ends up. It's all about individual team medical evaluation. Even if he's off of the draft board and, I don't know, 29 teams have him eliminated with a red pen, all it takes is 3 of those other teams to be able to say yes to a player that never missed a snap because of that heart issue and was allowed to work out after it was found at the NFL Scouting Combine, a luxury benefit and opportunity that Maurice Hurst was not afforded last year.
Scott Bair, NBC Sports California. You just mentioned your mock draft, which you can go right to NBC Sports Bay Area, or you can just Google Scott Bair mock draft. It'll bring it right up. Your 2nd round pick, the number 35 overall at least, you have Chris Lindstrom, the guard out of Boston College, but you put the caveat in there that they need a strong side edge rusher even at that point, and that might be the spot they trade down to grab somebody like LJ Collier out of TCU. Ultimately, and I know they have backup plans there as well, as you pointed out, do you think they stay with this pick, or is this really, if you had to bet they're going to trade down at some point, is this the one you have targeted?
I think that's the one where teams who are pretty good draft down on the board are looking at it and would say, that's a guy that we have a 1st-round grade on that's still available day 2. Let's go up and get him. And yes, to your point, that could be a spot that they could trade out of. They do need a guard, and again, with John Gruden having final say, I know that Paul Gunther is kind of sitting there through free agency and being like, okay, you guys spent all that money on defense, on offensive players, and the wide receivers make more than my entire front 7. It's my turn, right? And then 2 of the first 3 or 2 of the first 4 are going to be all offensive players, and they do need a guard. But my gosh, Paul Gunther needs so much more. And at 35, they may be able to drop back, get an LJ Collier type, pick up a 3rd-round pick, and really get into that well and start building up the depth of this roster. But for all these trades down that we talk about that they need, and I do expect there's only so many opportunities to grab true frontline foundational players for 2019 and beyond. They have a lot of picks early, and those are the greatest opportunities to land these types of franchise cornerstones. And it's always a risk when you trade down, and yeah, you may get bulk and you may get depth and you may get quality starters, but will you get superstars? That's always the risk that you take when you move down out of 27 or, as you mentioned, at 35.
That is Scott Bair, NBC Sports California. Comprehensive, over the top even. Just amazing coverage of the Raiders draft. Coming up, the whole thing will start. Lives will be changed. Fortunes of teams will be changed forever. All coming up in just over 30 hours. Scott, I know you're slammed. We appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll catch up post-draft at some point. But good luck, and everybody make sure you go check out all his fine work at NBCSportsCalifornia.com. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
All right, you take care. That is Scott Bair.
You're listening to The Drive.